Welcome to the Equity Plus podcast from CareShare Health Alliance. I'm your host, Erin Story, Director of Communications here at CareShare. In this episode, we talked to Yesenia Cuello about what it was like for her to grow up in rural eastern North Carolina while working in tobacco fields with her mother and sisters, and how that inspires the work she does today advocating for farm workers and their families as the Executive Director of NC Field. I want to note that Yesenia is now a member of CareShare's Board of Directors, although she wasn't at the time of this interview. Like episode 2 of the podcast, which featured Dr. Dawn Baldwin Gibson of Peloton Ministries, our interview with Yesenia was originally recorded last year as part of our NC BIPOC Leaders series of articles. Yesenia was kind enough to let us use that interview for today's episode, so now let's hear from her.
I am originally from Los Angeles, California. My mom is originally from Morelos, Cuernavaca, Mexico, and my dad is from Santo Domingo from the Dominican Republic. So they met up in California, which is where I'm from. Many years ago, my mom moved over to North Carolina. It was, I think, 4 of us at the time. I want to say I was probably about 5 years old whenever we moved to North Carolina. And we just had family here, and it was so much more peaceful. And not only that, but there was a lot of the smog going on in California. So she just, made the transition. I do oftentimes get that question. It's like, how do you go from California to North Carolina? My mom, me and her are very attached. I remember whenever I was in school in California, they were teaching me everything in English. Mm-hmm. So my numbers, I'm sorry. They were teaching me everything in Spanish. So my numbers were in Spanish and the alphabet was in Spanish. So whenever I got here, I knew absolutely no English.
So did you learn English when you came to North Carolina?
I did. So my older brother is 11 months and 2 weeks. He likes to be specific, but he is a little bit older than I am. And whenever he started school, he started to learn some English. So he would take some of it back home with him. And then I, of course, started shortly after. And that's whenever I started learning more of the English. But I do remember that in kindergarten, whenever I first started, they actually held me back 1 year so that I could learn more. We actually did have ESL classes. It was very different. I remember bits and pieces of me learning English, and I remember a good portion of it was on the computer and through video, through games, educational games on the computer. And I remember being pulled out of class and things like that. But it was through ESL that I learned English within that elementary school time period. So by 5th grade, I want to say that I was fairly fluid in the English language. So I was very fortunate that I started learning at such a young age. And then I did just turn 30 in March earlier this year.
Oh, okay. So what area of North Carolina did you move to, and are you still in there?
We moved straight into Kinston, North Carolina. So that's definitely eastern North Carolina. Kinston is a small city area. We didn't stay there very long. Eventually, my mom, because whenever we first arrived, we stayed with an aunt of mine for, I want to say, a couple weeks before we found a mobile home right across the street from the old Pink Hill Elementary School, which is even more rural. I mean, Pink Hill is such a small town, a population of maybe about 300 people. We had one light. I remember them opening the food line up for the first time, so that was a big deal for us. But yeah, we moved directly across the street from what is now the old Pink Hill Elementary School. And I remember my mom waking us up and getting us ready in the morning and walking us across the street to school. That's a memory that I cherish. And honestly, we were very fortunate that we were so close and that it was so accessible. It didn't necessarily require a lot of traveling.
Is there anything in your history or your background that kind of drives your work now, or that you feel has impacted your leadership style?
Yeah, I feel like my entire background and experience growing up has influence in some way, shape, or form, what I consider my leadership style and the work that we currently do now. Whenever we first moved here, I do remember that my mom, she worked in a hog farm for a couple years, and then eventually she started working in North Carolina's tobacco fields. So that was primarily the crop that she worked in, and she would work, throughout the entire season. So from planting to topping the flour to setting it up to dry. So she did all of that. And then I remember, so my mom, whenever we came here, it was just her, my dad didn't come along with us. So my mom was a single parent. It was 4 of us at the time. It eventually became 6 of us. So it's a lot of work, especially for somebody coming into the country. And, there's nothing that really teaches you how to be good American as far as laws and things like that. But I do remember that even now, her English is still a little bit broken. So at the time, she didn't know anything. So coming into it, I'm pretty sure that maybe making the transition from California to, rural Eastern North Carolina is like from one country to another. But yeah, so she worked in agriculture for many, many years. And I remember that right around the age whenever I want to say about 14 years old. And then me and my siblings are very close in age. So I was about 14 and two of my younger sisters. The other one was 13 and then the other one was 12. They would call us Las Chicas Poderosas. And at the time we were extremely obsessed, and maybe even now low key, extremely obsessed with like the Powerpuff Girls. So we would watch that all the time. And they would call us Las Chicas Poderosas even back in the day. They said that whenever we got together, there was little that we couldn't accomplish. I do remember that summer was coming, spend a lot of time with my mom, but at the same time, we did get to see little her, whenever she was leaving to go to work really early in the morning and then coming back really late. So we knew that there was a lot of work on her part to make sure there were clothes on our backs, the roof over our head, and food on our tables. So we also wanted to contribute not only that, but growing up, we did view my mom as kind of like an idol in like the way of like she's extremely independent, and we always strived to be able to achieve that. So yeah, so we got together one summer and we told my mom that we wanted to go work with her. We wanted to be able to make our own money. We wanted to be able to help support and pay some of the bills over the summer. The goal was to be able to save some of that money to not only help support the bills and other home expenses, but also be able to save up to buy our school supplies, maybe a new pair of shoes, maybe a book bag for the new school year. My mom, I remember we did ask her why she even let us go, because oftentimes we do receive that question, like who would let their child go work in such a dangerous industry? And my mom literally said that she thought that because she said she looked at us and she was like, these girls, they've just never worked a day in their lives. Like they don't know what they're asking whenever they're like, hey, let us go work with you. And my mom was like, okay. She's like, I'm going to let them come with me one day and they're going to be out there the entire time with me. And they're going to see how hard it is. It's not easy labor. And they're never going to want to come back. This is going to be a one-day thing so they can leave me alone. She was like, let me go ahead and take them that one day. So we did. I remember the next day early in the morning, my mom woke up. We used to like heat the burritos for the most part in the microwave, and then we would wrap them with a napkin and then wrap those with aluminum foil to keep them warm. Or, any kind of food that we have, we would double wrap and then aluminum foil so that it could stay warm for as long as possible. And then because we didn't know if we were going to have a break, so whatever it was that we took with us had to be something that was very quick and easy to be able to kind of grab and go. So my mom prepped the food and we went and we got ready. And, we were like, okay, it's hot outside. So we were like, let's go ahead. I was like, let's get ready. We wore our t-shirts, shorts, flip-flops. We were out there like we were going to a beach, like we were going to go outside in the yard because it was hot. And my mom took one look at us, one behind the other, walking out of the room that we all shared. And she sent us right back. She's like, I don't know where you think you're going in that. We didn't know. Said socks. She said tennis shoes. She said probably the most rundown jeans you have, don't expect to take those anywhere out. She said a t-shirt. She said grab one of the long sleeve, like thin plaid like shirts to put even on top of that. And we're like, it's so hot outside. Why would we double shirt? And definitely a hat. So we did that. And it was later on that day whenever we got there. And I remember the sun coming up and, the plants being really wet. Whenever we got out there, and we realized why. Like it was so hot that it's necessary to cover up as much as possible and to stay cool as much as possible. I remember that first day I went home, and I want to say the first few weeks I dreamt of tobacco fields. Like you would see where you start. And there were some times whenever you worked in long rows of tobaccos where you didn't see the end. And we realized like this is very hard work, but we also realized that this was work that my mom was putting in to be able to support all of us, and we wanted to be able to contribute. So that's why we continued going back. But not only that, but we also realized that while we were there, we would maybe sing along or we would joke around with each other, or, in between conversation times tends to go by a little bit faster. So we figured, even though my mom was out there, she was like, okay, they're coming with me so I can take care of them. But at the same time, we were like, okay, we're going to be out there and she's taking care of us, but who's taking care of her? Aww. So we continued to go out, and that was kind of like our way to look out for each other. Even And so I'm an extremely tall person. I'm probably about 5'10". So I'm fairly tall. And I remember situations whenever we were working in tobacco, whenever the leaves were, or like the plant was like taller than I was.
Mm-hmm.
And some of my siblings are shorter than I am. So we would yell back from one row to the next. We would make sure that we would all leave the row out approximately together. Those of us that finished first, which was usually my mom, and sometimes she would have to take 2 rows to make sure that we wouldn't get too behind. So we would finish, we would go back to like the next 2 rows where my sisters were at, and we would just kind of like meet them halfway. So start from that end and work our way back towards them so that we could all start the same row together. Yeah, so we could continue to be together and, just look out for each other. But that way we didn't realize, I think growing up and hearing stories of like a lot of the things that happen, like the lack of transparency whenever it comes to like the agricultural system in general, we didn't realize how fortunate we were to have each other, and the fact that it's not the same for everyone. Do you remember sometimes people ask us, they were like, did anybody ask you, how old you were or if you had ever worked? And I remember whenever we got there was a gentleman there that was taking names to kind of document, how many hours or who worked that day. And they did ask us if we had ever worked in agriculture before. We said that we had, even though we had never worked there before. And that was like the gist of like, okay, you're allowed to work. We've done a few, like while working with NC Field, and back in the day, we did join their youth group, and I can offer more information about that as we go along. But I do remember that there were situations. There was one specific situation whenever we were having to document or interview children to see the both sides of the story. So why were parents allowing their children to work in the field, and why were children going to go work in the fields? And I remember going to a tobacco field specifically, and there we found children as young as the age of maybe 8 or 9 working in a sweet potato field. I want to say that's probably some of the youngest ones we've ever found. The feedback we would sometimes receive is like where we start having conversations around daycare and availability and like the hours. And whenever you look at it, and you can apply that to health as well, because daycare is obviously open up sometimes after a farm worker leaves to go to work, and sometimes they close before workers done working. And honestly, I feel like that's very similar to some of the situations that we encounter now with the work that we're doing with, like, we'll do like health screening events. Like back in March, I want to say in 2020, we did a 4-day screening event over in Mount Olive, North Carolina, extremely rural, a lot of farm workers. I mean, we're just like based in like the heart of agricultural. We're just very well situated there, like surrounded by, 30 plus farm worker labor camps, a lot of border families. But we did a large health screening event in which we invited a lot of like partners and connections to come in and do COVID testing, do blood pressure checks, do cholesterol checks, do the whole 9 yards. And the thing is that what we found out of that is that some people were really encouraged. Within that 4-day event, we were able to screen 606 exactly members from the farm worker community. The response was unlike any, that even the people that were there that have been doing a lot more work in supporting farm workers longer than I have. So they were like, we've never seen a response like this, like in the last, I don't know how many years. So we were very, very fortunate that the community definitely supports us and felt comfortable approaching us to address their needs. Bring into the issue with now we've done screenings, now they have a general idea, now realizing that people are pre-diabetic or they have some other health concern, and they want to be able to prioritize their health, but at the same time with like the work schedule that farm workers sometimes have and the hours that when community health centers function, they're not able to get there, or transportation still continues to be a big issue, especially in like the rural part of Eastern North Carolina. People do sometimes ask us in terms of like our coverage area, like the area that our organization covers specifically, and we do cover a 6-county region, but we only claim to cover a 6-county region because we're very aware of our capacity and the fact that we're already very much stretched, extremely thin in terms of what we're able to do and the amount of need that we encounter with the work that we do. But we do oftentimes, for example, whenever we hold events, whether it's, a health screening event or a COVID-19 vaccination event or food distribution event, we do very much pull from other counties. And we're not the ones, we never turn anybody away, but we're definitely have expanded to cover into other counties as well. We just don't claim to serve them because we want to be able to give them what they need and we understand our capacity.
I think I read in your background that you had worked with the youth program for NC Field, or you started it. Is it Poder Juvenil?
It's called Poder Juvenil Campesino, or Farmworker Youth Power. And it started many years ago. I joined the youth group back whenever I was 17, I believe. I want to say I was about 17. Yeah, because it was around that 3 or 4 years after working in agriculture over the summer. The youth group, I was part of the core group of youth that joined, and we were made up of either children of farm workers or children who were farm workers themselves. And it was to teach us a lot, to teach us around public speaking, to teach us about advocacy and the importance of advocacy, to teach us a lot about health and safety. That's whenever I first learned about pesticides after working years in agriculture. I've learned so much, and the youth group played such a huge role in my life and even the work that we do now. My sisters actually joined the youth group along with us as well. I want to say that after a few years in the youth group, I've worked my way to like the president of our youth group, and then continuing that transition onto like NC Field's board of directors. I was public relations chair for a couple years for NC Field before transitioning onto their hired staff as their program manager. So I manage all of the programs, including the youth group, Poder Juvenil Campesino. And then after at least 3 years of being NC Field's program manager, in 2019, I transitioned to take on the role that I have now of executive director. So it was a decade's worth transition, but every step of it led me to where I am today.
Was there anything in particular that kept you with NC Field in like that type of work?
Yeah, I want to say the fact that I am very much not only embedded in the community, but a part of the community that I support, and being able to see that direct impact and realizing that this is something great that we're doing here, continuing wanting to see that forward was probably what has kept me with NC Field for as long as it has. That's probably the biggest one. I was like being able to see that direct impact, to see that direct, even local impact has been super helpful. Not only that, but we've done other work. For example, we did a project with Human Rights Watch a couple years ago, and being able to see even the impact at higher levels has been super helpful. Like whenever they updated the worker protection standards many years ago, then we were able to be a part of that. And honestly, just bringing attention to the realities and realizing that sometimes whenever I do share our story, or we do highlight the work and the life of farm workers and of this, this community, I still receive shocked faces and realizing there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. I even learned so much. I remember whenever I joined the youth group, I was also the youngest one on a team that was doing a farm worker housing study with Wake Forest University. And the goal was to be able to find a connection and collect data as to how the farm workers housing was having a direct impact on farm workers' health.
Yeah.
So that's whenever, again, I learned so much. I learned about wage workers. For the most part, I feel like what I was surrounded with, or what I would see, were just farm workers. For me, people were just always farm workers. I didn't realize that you have, your migrant farm workers, how the migrant stream works. I didn't realize, again, the lack of transparency, hearing other people's stories as well, and realizing that there's a lot of issues that still continue to exist. Being able to see all that has kind of led, again, to seeing that direct impact and seeing the amount of need that still needs to be done, and how this community has been excluded. And if I can do anything to better the lives of them and my neighbors and my family, then that's what I'm going to continue to do.
You're the executive director for NC Field. So what does that kind of entail? And tell me a little bit about NC Field too.
Yeah, so NC Field is a grassroots nonprofit organization that covers the 6-county region over in southeastern North Carolina. So those counties are Lenoir, Greene, Wayne, Duplin, Jones, and that western part of Craven County. We do have core pillars. We do education, leadership, and dignity. I want to say that as far as NC Field, a lot of the work that we do is because we realize that there are organizations that are trying to serve farm workers, is that try and be that bridge and help streamline some of those services and make sure that it gets to the community. Not only that, but a lot of the work that we're currently doing now is making sure that the community has the tools that it needs to be able to advocate for themselves as well. So whether that looks like representation and other tables and other conversations conversations, especially with some of the conversations that are being had that directly impact our daily lives. But we are guided by education, leadership, and dignity. We do have programs and initiatives. Some of them you've already mentioned, and that's Poder Juvenil Campesino, the Farmworker Youth program that we currently have. That program has still continued to run even now throughout COVID. We've just had to make that transition to doing more virtual. Another one that we currently have is Give Food a Face, and that has everything that we do. It's like the umbrella of everything that we do under advocacy and bringing awareness to farm workers and lives of farm workers and issues. And, again, adding on to that equals not equitable, and how current systems that are in place that were created, many, many years ago have continued to historically and then presently exclude this entire population. Everything at all levels in terms of advocacy is under our Give Food a Face. And then we also currently have our Sembrando Salud program as well. So Sembrando Salud was created right at the beginning of the pandemic. So making that transition from Hurricane Florence that hit and devastated North Carolina to straight into a pandemic. I feel like that's exactly what it looked like. Whenever I took on the executive director role, I remember that a lot of the work that we were doing was around food scarcity and things like that. It was very much response. But I do remember that people were still suffering from the after effects of the hurricane, and the fact that in rural areas, we lack a lot of infrastructure. So a lot of the roads were damaged. So as if transportation wasn't already hard. I remember even during the hurricane having to find different ways to be able to get the families that weren't able to get out of their homes, and walking in and seeing a mother who was scared to leave her house because we had a situation where somebody documented there was an immigration ICE vehicle parked outside of the Walmart. So keep in mind, like almost everybody goes to Walmart. So we were running into situations where families were scared to leave their home to even go to the store. So they were starving in their homes with their families. Honestly, the things that we saw and that we witnessed were absolutely devastating. So then we, of course, transitioned into this pandemic that none of us were prepared for, and that there was little around what to do, what not to do, because this was definitely a first. And I'm pretty sure we've all kind of like been winging it in terms of like learning as we go. But we also realized back that we're fairly small nonprofit. We were like, okay, well, we have very little trial and error room. So we have to expand. So one of the things that was really good was the fact that the pandemic affected everybody the same in terms of like it didn't exclude anybody. COVID didn't care if you were documented or undocumented. COVID didn't care where you sat in terms of society, and it didn't discriminate at all. It ran through absolutely everybody. So the thing is that we were able to expand and grow and realize that the only way that we're going to be able to even create one positive dent in this pandemic is if we work together. So that's whenever we got together with, I know that I'm transitioning off the Sembrando Salud framework, but there has been so much work done. But we did establish an advisory board that was made up of participants from like the health department or the community health centers, of people from the education program, and people from other organizations that support this population being a part of that advisory board, and us coming together and being like, okay, help me help you. But at the same time, we were all helping each other. So one of the things that we realized is, overlapping services. If somebody else was doing it, we don't need to do that. And we can focus our area on a service gap that exists that nobody else is doing. So that's where NC Field comes in. And I want to say that as far as I remember, whenever Sembrando Salud was first starting off, I remember sitting at a table with my kids, being able to see them grow up and be such a huge part of their lives. I just call them my kids. And I am extremely attached to the programmatic side, even though whenever I took on the executive director role, I transitioned to do more administration. But I remember that, we were having a conversation because some of my youth's dad had recently passed away from cancer. So in between conversations that we were having, we realized that, okay, this person has just passed away. And then, there's a neighbor that passed away, or there's another family member that's passed away. So we realized that a lot of members from our community were passing away from what could have been preventable death had there been preliminary measures and screenings taken place. So that's whenever we started to shift to the health gap. So I want to say that something really good about that NC Field is that because again, we're so embedded in the community, is that we tend to be a direct reflection of what the community tells us that it needs. So that's whenever Sembrando Salud framework was created. So the Sembrando Salud framework was created based off of the feedback from farm workers and the community telling us what they needed to be in place in order for them to even feel comfortable addressing their health concerns. So that looks like, after hour care. That looks like not only having obviously that trust in the community, but also, transportation continues to be an issue. The language barrier tends to be an issue. I want to say that we've encountered situations whenever there may be a Spanish flyer, but whenever you finally are able to click on the link, the information is only provided in English. Whenever the hurricane came out and they realized that a lot of the community members received the messages, but they were in English, they didn't receive the same notification that everybody else did because they didn't understand the message. And then they started putting those messages out in Spanish as well. It did take a hurricane in order for that to happen, but we're glad that it got done. In this transition, in my most previous and actually all of my experience within this field, I've learned to definitely celebrate every win. So that was definitely a step in the right direction. I remember another program that we currently have is our Farmworker Emergency Fund. So our Farmworker Emergency Fund is also like hurricane response funding as well. So that tended to look like direct financial assistance to the community, whether that looks like us having a family that doesn't have light in their home, or whether that looks like we have a family that's about to get evicted. So it looks like direct financial response to cover some of those emergency situations. Or maybe we have a farm worker that is in an unsafe area and they have to get out. We provide some of that emergency funding. There's a lot of that. I want to say that funding is very much depleted just because of the amount of need that we encounter. But those are our 4 main core programs.
Do you find that this type of advocacy for this population can be harder than anything else?
Yeah, so we were able to expand back in 2019. I want to say it was August. We had 1 full-time staff person, and that was me. So with the support from other foundations, we were able to expand. I want to say that one of those supporters was KBR, KP Reynolds. We were able to expand NCField's capacity and hire on more staff to implement some of the efforts that I've mentioned in terms of like specifically Sembrando Salud. I want to say that one of the good things, probably why we've been so successful, has been the fact that the people that we've hired to be a part of NCField staff are primarily from the farm worker community. Mm-hmm. So some of them were even former PJC members that have transitioned to serve NCField at different capacities. So even though I'm NCField's executive director and I was a part of the youth group and made all that transition, there are other former PJC members that serve NCField at different capacities. They're very much embedded and very culturally aware of what some of those challenges are. And I want to say that whenever it comes to advocacy and uplifting farm workers' voices, because I do oftentimes tell people who better to tell you how to best support farm workers and farm workers themselves. Oftentimes I do find myself, even on this end, where I'm sitting in conversations and in rooms where I'm the only one that looks like me. So we realize that there's still a lot of work that's left to be done because there needs to be more of that. There needs to be, other people. And we've already identified some of those leaders in the community that are very much open to sharing their stories, but we do encounter some of that fear that continues to exist in all of the community. I remember that back in the day, whenever we were doing a lot of advocacy work, we also received pushback. I remember situations whenever we were going to go work with my mom, and me and all of my sisters have this hair that is just so curly. Mm-hmm. And they would call us also las chinas. So we're very easy to recognize. And I remember whenever they would approach us and they would tell us, we don't want any trouble. So there were people that wouldn't even let my mom work or let us work because they were now scared about the attention that we were drawing to the agricultural system in general, or like the waves that we just were creating that just kind of took people by storm. Those have been some of the challenges. Not only that, but another challenge that we received was actually one from the community itself, but especially with like a lot of the work that we were doing with the youth group, because people have to realize, and there's a lot of educating that needs to be done, but some people had to realize that sometimes that child was providing for that family and putting it on that table. We're advocating for a child has to be at least 16 years of age or at least 18 years old to work in a tobacco field, like, okay, that means that now my child can't work in agriculture. That means no food put on the table. So what are you doing to supplement some of that? So I want to say that with TJC, a lot of the work that we do is around internships. And of course, we received support in order to be able to provide that opportunity, but we'll create educational internships over the summer. So whether that looks like a garden project or whether that looks like farm worker children going to farm worker labor camps, of course, with an adult ally to provide occupational health and safety education to farm workers on different topics, such as like heat stress or whatever else it needs to be, whether it's pesticides or tobacco poisoning, or it tended to vary. But that was our way of being able to supplement some of that income that the child would have received over, for example, over the summer, to kind of like limit the amount of children that we had working in agriculture. But we did need to teach people that, yes, take children out of the fields, but this is a much larger issue in terms of, this is how much farm workers are making, and this is how much the industry is bringing in. And oftentimes what it looks like is that the farm workers that are harvesting these fruits and vegetables can't go to the grocery store and even purchase them. And then again, that just ties into the whole other issue in terms of why does obesity exist within the farm worker community? Why is diabetes so prevalent, hypertension? Why are we encountering all of these health disparities within this community? And I'm like, because it's cheaper to go to McDonald's and buy a cheeseburger for your kid than it is to go to the grocery store and buy organic, healthy food.
Have you had any experiences that stand out where you feel like your work has really made a difference?
In terms of some of the conversations, again, that we're having now and some of the tables that we're at, I feel like, again, that's always a plus. But I want to say whenever I felt that we had the largest impact was whenever we did that study and that project with Human Rights Watch, in which we were able to get the worker protection standards updated for the first time since they had been created. So now the worker protection standards included things such as, if you're going to provide this training, it doesn't need to be provided once every 5 years, and now it needs to be provided every year. This training, whenever you're providing it, it needs to be in a language in which the person that's receiving that training actually understands. So that training not only needs to encompass pesticides, but it also needs to encompass that aftercare. So how do people that are working around and being exposed to pesticides make sure that they don't take them home to their children? I mean, there was a lot of changes and updates that were made to that worker protection standard, and the fact that we were able to be a part of that and realize that this is the kind of positive change that we can have, kind of encourage us to continue this movement in the right direction. That was one of the bigger ones.
Yeah, that's amazing. So what is your leadership style? Do you have any particular principles that you use?
I want to say that back in the day, I also worked at a McDonald's. I started off at McDonald's, and within the first year, I was transitioned into the management position. I don't necessarily think that I'm a bossy person, but I want to say that I am a good leader in the terms of the fact that I've been there and I've done this work, and I don't ask anybody to do anything that I wouldn't expect myself. So I not only hold staff accountable, but I also hold myself accountable to those same standards. So I want to say that's constantly how I've continued to lead. Not only that, but I continue to maintain like the highest regard for full transparency and communication. The only way that this is going to work, even amongst us and our communication, is that we remain 100% transparent. A lot of the funding that we've received throughout the pandemic has been COVID response money. So a lot of it, even though it supports a lot of our staff as well, they realize that some of this funding is very short term. So even whenever we hire staff on, like, yes, we're going to make sure that this is how you arrive, but we're going to make sure the training that you receive while you're also with us, you'll be able to take that. If COVID funding gets cut off on us, you can take that training and implement it somewhere else. The current staff that we have do not make enough in general for the work that they do, but they also realize that with the experience that they have, they can go somewhere else, make more money, and yet they choose to continue to stay with us.
Oh,
so
wow.
I feel like that says a lot, seeing what works and just being the same and being present. We have staff meetings and I'm there, and we remind each other of things that we appreciate. Communication, transparency, and respect has been at the highest whenever it comes to me. Please and thank you. Understanding that people go through things, but as long as you do and show good communication, then I feel like people respond positively to that.
Do you feel that your status as a BIPOC woman has affected your leadership at all?
I definitely feel like my experience and my background has affected my leadership a lot, actually. And the fact that I have gotten the feedback of, Yesenia, you're from the United States. You don't know what it's like. That one sometimes tends to take a nerve on my end, and I come extremely defensive. But then I also realize they don't understand that even though I am documented, I did grow up with an undocumented background. I do know what that's like. I don't get asked that question very often, but I do try and make sure that they understand the sacrifices that were made. Yeah, I remember walking into grocery stores, and I remember there was an IGA over in Pink Hill, and I remember there was a billboard where people would sometimes post workers needed or call
Right.
this number, and they would put some in Spanish there whenever they needed tobacco workers or they needed anything in general. And I remember walking in, and there was an older white couple, and whenever people would look at my mom and tell her to leave, that she doesn't belong. Even growing up, and I know that being a part of the community and looking the way that I look in terms of like I'm a part of the community, I realize we have shared experiences, and I want to say that people are more likely to open the door to me if I knock,
Right.
if I look like them than if I look like somebody else. It had a huge impact. One of the things that I kept from people, even growing up at first, was where my mother was from. And that was at first, and that was because in my way of helping people understand that we're human and we belong and we deserve to be able to live long, healthy lives. So sometimes people would get to know me, and then in terms of like politics and in terms of like how people think and trying to change their mind. And it's like after I share, and we can have adult mature conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And afterwards I let them know like my mom is undocumented, because and making that transition, because people oftentimes use the word illegal, and letting them know, now that you know me, how can you look at me and tell me I don't belong? And bringing some of those realities to the table, and honestly just bringing it home from them. Like if you don't feel good, you hop in the car and you go to the doctor. If you're hungry, you hop in the car and you go to a restaurant. Or you need to buy food for your family, you hop in a car and you go to the grocery store. That isn't the same for the community that we serve. Like it's not as easy, and it's honestly a privilege to be able to do that. But for us, if my mom would hop in a car and she would leave, the possibility that she wouldn't return was always very present. Even now, don't realize, they're like, oh, well, they can just go get papers. Or people that are ignorant and they say like, oh, they just don't want to do taxes. And I'm like, some of those ideas are some of the things that, some of the people that are even willfully ignorant are my biggest challenges that we still have to break through.
Right. There's so much misconception about it.
Yeah. Or they think it's an easy process or an easy fix. So like even like your DACA, they're like, okay, people now have DACA, that's great. But whenever they apply to your local community college, they're still charged out-of-state tuition. So the challenges that we encountered with the youth group, because at first we were seeing a huge high school dropout rate. So the goal was to get us and then provide us with the support that we needed to be able to graduate high school. So now we have children graduating high school. How do we get them to college? In the school system, it doesn't necessarily, or it doesn't really teach you, or like maybe we encounter situations where the counselor wasn't familiar with DACA or being undocumented, or they felt like after high school, there was nothing else. So why waste my time on this child that's undocumented if they can't pursue a higher education? And that's not necessarily the case. So there's a lot of education that needs to be done. But even with a lot of like the health stuff that we've encountered, we have a partnership with, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the free clinic out of Campbell University, Campbell Community Care Clinic.
So I haven't heard of that one.
Yeah, Campbell University Community Care Clinic is a free clinic out of Campbell University that we partner with. We hold events on a weekly basis. And whenever I say events, I mean, we're providing clinic in partnership with Campbell. They're providing clinical services to the farmer community in an area where they feel comfortable approaching, which is the partnership that we currently have over at the Catholic Church, Maria Reina de las Americas, and they're providing it within the days and times that farm workers are available. So currently, after a year, I want to say that we're probably at that 100 mark. And the good thing is that we're not only identifying some of those challenges and some of those barriers, but also seeing them all the way through. So whenever it comes to the case management, like that's the work that we currently do. So it's not only, okay, now you've been seen and that's the end of it. Like We continue to check in on our patients all the time, especially since I think like 40 out of all the patients that we have diabetes. A lot of the people from the community haven't prioritized their health, so they're coming in with definitely advanced health issues. So the medications and everything is free to the farm worker. We'll actually pick up the medications and we'll deliver it to them, and we'll make sure that they understand how to even take their medications. So we do the whole 9 yards. If there's additional need in terms of like if this person needs a surgery or if this person needs something else, then we make sure that we set up the appointments and we make sure that they get there. So it's been a lot, but I want to say that clinic at first was 0% funded whenever we started. So a lot of that work that we were doing was not funded at all. I want to say that right now we did receive grants. I want to say it's probably about 20% funded. The rest of it is not. And we continue to still run the way that we have, with the hopes that the work that we're doing, because we've been very intentional in the data collecting and all that we'll be able to achieve some more sustainable funding to be able to continue running.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Do you have anything you'd like to share, any advice you'd like to share for other BIPOC or Latino leaders?
I want to say that some of the best advice that, we receive is definitely celebrate every win, and realizing that that we're not out there alone. Like, we are a community and we are making a change. And that I feel like I'm an extremely hopeful and optimistic person. So I'm very hopeful that with the attention that this community has been able to garner within the last few years, that we'll be able to continue to push on this movement and hopefully push for positive change.
Has anybody ever given you any advice that has always stuck with you?
Yeah, the advice that has always stuck with me is that the worst that somebody can tell you whenever like a request or something like that is like the worst somebody can tell you is no, but if you don't ask, the answer continues to be no. And that closed mouth don't get fed.
If you're not at the table, you're going to be on the table.
Absolutely.
If you can think of anything that is like upcoming that you're working on or that you want to promote that might be happening later on in the year, is there anything you can think of?
Yeah, so I want to say that a lot of that is the work that we're doing now in terms of participation in different tables. So having a higher impact in terms of not only the impact that we've had at the local level, but being in communication and in partnership with people that have a higher impact at like the state levels, representatives and things like that.
Thank you so much for listening to episode 5 of the Equity Plus podcast. And special thanks again to Yesenia for letting us share her interview. If you'd like to find out more about NC Field, you can visit their website at ncfield.org. That is ncfield.org. And you can also find CareShare's article about Yesenia on the news section of our website at caresharehealth.org. So if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe to hear more from community leaders and community-based organizations in North Carolina about how they're working to advance health equity. To learn more about CareShare Health Alliance, visit us at caresharehealth.org, and don't forget to check out our hub for community-based organizations working to promote health equity and community voice, the Equity Plus Network, at equitypn.org. That is EQUITYPN.org. We can't wait to connect with you there.